Hey guys, picture this. You step outside into Dream City, the kind of night where the air feels like a cool whisper, and the sky is a navy blanket stitched with 1,000 tiny fires. You hear the distant hum of late-night cars and the soft rustle of leaves, but for a moment, it's like the whole world hit pause and just breathed with you. Before we drift further into this peaceful night story, smash that like button if you're here for some calm vibes and tell me in the comments what your perfect nighttime escape looks like. Now dim the lights, get cozy, maybe sip something warm, and let's lose ourselves in the gentle glow above those city streets. Ready? The sun slipped behind the marble spires of Dream City like a shy actor taking a final bow, casting long violet shadows across the cobblestones. Myra, a wiry girl with ink-stained fingers and a telescope that smelled of pine sap, lingered on the balcony of her rooftop garden, inhaling the cool breath of twilight. The air tasted of roasted chestnuts and distant sea salt, a comforting cocktail that made her heart thrum like a drum in a medieval tavern. She lifted her eyes to the bruised sky, where the first shy stars peeked out, winking like mischievous fireflies at a midnight rave. A soft sigh escaped her lips, as if the city itself were exhaling after a long day of gossip and commerce. Just then, a clatter of wooden wheels announced the arrival of Leo, the wandering lantern keeper, whose cart creaked like an old pirate ship on a calm sea. He wore a patched coat embroidered with constellations that glowed faintly, as if each stitch held a tiny candle flickering against the gloom. "Evening, Myra," he called, his voice a blend of gravel and honey, and tossed a lantern that sputtered to life, scattering amber droplets of light onto the promenade. The promenade itself smelled of wet stone and a hint of street vendor kebabs, a pungent reminder that even dreamers must pay rent. Myra laughed, noting that Leo's lanterns were brighter than the glow from the Death Star, and together they stepped onto the quiet path, their footsteps echoing like distant drums. Beyond the fountain of silvered water, hidden behind a veil of ivy that dripped with dew, they uncovered a narrow stairwell that spiraled down like a rabbit hole in an old fairy tale. The stairs groaned under their weight, releasing clouds of dust that smelled of ancient parchment and forgotten cheese. Yes, cheese, because a stray rat had left a pungent souvenir behind. At the bottom, a vaulted observatory yawned open, its dome etched with celestial maps that glittered under the lantern's glow. The floor was slick with spilled oil, making each step a cautious ballet, while the air hummed with the low, mournful chant of an old organ that seemed to be playing itself. Myra's breath caught as she saw a massive brass telescope aimed at the heavens, its lenses polished to a shine that could blind a dragon. Pinned to the central console was an ancient map, its edges frayed like the sleeves of a wizard's robe, depicting a constellation no modern astronomer had ever charted. The constellation formed a perfect spiral, resembling a peace sign made of stars, and was labeled in a script that read, "The whisper of tranquility, only visible when the city sleeps and the lanterns listen." Leo raised an eyebrow, muttering that the map looked like something a Game of Thrones prop master might have doodled during a coffee break. Myra traced the lines with a trembling finger, feeling the cool metal of the map like a secret handshake from the cosmos. Ironically, the map promised lasting peace, yet it was hidden in a dusty, rat-infested observatory, proof that the universe loves a good plot twist. Together, they aligned the brass telescope with the hidden spiral, and as the first full star of the forgotten constellation burst into view, A soft, melodic hum rippled through the stone walls, vibrating the lanterns into a gentle chorus. The sound washed over Dream City like a warm blanket, coaxing even the most stubborn night shift baker to pause and listen. Myra felt a quiet joy bloom in her chest, as if she had just found the secret recipe for world peace, equal parts starlight, lantern oil, and a dash of daring. Leo winked, proclaiming that they had just pulled a cosmic Easter egg, and the city below would wake to a dawn tinged with hope and the faint scent of roasted chestnuts. As the first light of morning brushed the marble spires, the hidden observatory sealed itself once more, leaving only the lingering promise that peace, like a star, can be found when you look up at the right moment. Under the bruised violet sky of Dream City, Myra unrolled the ancient parchment with a sigh that sounded like a sighing sail. Leo, ever the eager scribe, traced the constellations with a charcoal stick, his fingertips leaving smudges like fresh graffiti on a marble wall. The night wind slipped through the cracked shutters, whispering through the alleys as if it were a gossiping bard from a forgotten empire. Their lantern flickered, casting trembling shadows that danced like jittery tick-tock dancers on the cobblestones. The map's ink glimmered faintly, promising a treasure brighter than a Hollywood premiere. But the wind was not content to be a mere background actor. It carried murmurs of doubt that curled around Myra's ears like sour milk. "You'll never find it," it hissed, sounding suspiciously like a disgruntled GPS recalculating routes. Leo chuckled, slapping his knee, and retorted, "Even the Oracle of Delphi had moments of indecision, and she still managed to drop a prophecy on a stone tablet." The scent of wet stone and distant incense rose, mixing with the metallic tang of old coins tossed in the river centuries ago. Their hearts thumped in rhythm with the wind's mutterings, a drumbeat of anxiety and anticipation. From the darkness emerged Cade, a merchant whose beard was as tangled as the city's sewer system, and whose eyes glittered like counterfeit gold. He shuffled in, balancing a sack of cracked crystal vials that clinked like tiny bells of doom. "Listen, kids," he rasped, his voice a blend of a pirate's swagger and a librarian's sigh. "The constellation you chase is guarded by the restless spirits of old dreams, and they love to test anyone who dares to steal their glow." He tossed a wilted lavender sprig into the air. It spiraled and fell with a sigh that smelled faintly of burnt popcorn. Cade's grin was as crooked as a medieval road, and his warning dripped with irony, for he himself sold hope in jars labeled dream dust. The spirits, Cade claimed, were the ghostly remnants of ambitions that never saw sunrise, like a rock star who never left the garage or a poet who only ever wrote on napkins. Their presence hung heavy, a chill that made Myra's hair stand like the bristles of a porcupine in a snowstorm. Leo imagined them as flickering holograms from a vintage arcade, each one demanding a password of courage and a token of sincerity. The night wind now howled, sounding like a choir of disgruntled cats, as the city's lanterns sputtered in protest. Yet amidst the dread, a faint aroma of fresh-baked bread wafted from a distant bakery, reminding them that even in darkness, life kept kneading its way forward. Undeterred, Myra pressed the map against the wind, her breath fogging the parchment like a dragon's exhale. Leo tapped his stick against the stone, producing a rhythm that sounded suspiciously like the opening riff of a classic rock anthem, daring the spirits to dance. Cade chuckled, shaking his sack of vials, and muttered, "If you survive, I'll throw in a complimentary dream catcher, free of charge, of course. The night wind, now a mischievous accomplice, lifted the map's edges, revealing a hidden sigil that glowed like a neon sign in a medieval tavern. With a shared grin, they stepped forward, ready to face whatever phantom doubts awaited, knowing that even the toughest night eventually yields to sunrise. The night draped Dream City in a silvery veil as we slipped through the rusted grate into the moonlit labyrinth beneath the streets. Damp stone walls exhaled a musty perfume of old rain and rusted iron, while distant drips sang a lazy percussion on the cobblestones. Our lanterns flickered like nervous fireflies, casting long shadows that stretched and shivered like gossiping strangers. I could hear the city's heartbeat thudding above, but down here it was a low, stubborn thrum of forgotten machinery. With each step, the echo of our boots seemed to answer a question we hadn't yet asked. Soon the corridor opened into a cavern of glassy arches, where flickering echoes of long-lost wishes floated like translucent soap bubbles. One bubble burst with the sigh of a child who'd wished for a dragon pet, releasing a puff of burnt sugar and teenage acne, an oddly comforting stench. Another shimmered with the regret of a baker who'd never tasted his own bread, and the air grew heavy with the sour dough of missed chances. Each apparition forced us to stare into a mirror of our own past, the labyrinth demanding we name the regrets we keep in our pockets. I muttered a half-hearted apology to a high school crush, and the echo replied with a sarcastic, "Finally, someone remembers my name." My companion, Lyra, chuckled, her laugh ricocheting off the stone like a mischievous sprite, and she nudged me toward a path lined with wilted roses that smelled like old gym socks. "We're basically in a Disney movie gone wrong," she said, winking at the flickering lanterns that now resembled paparazzi flashbulbs. The irony was palpable. We were hunting for hope while stepping over the soggy footprints of yesterday's mistakes. Yet each time a memory tried to trip us, we caught each other's elbows, turning potential falls into a clumsy tango of trust. The maze seemed to grin, its stone teeth showing as we whispered, "You can't spell regret without Gret, and that's just plain rude." Deeper still, the walls narrowed, and the air grew thick with the metallic tang of blood-scented incense. Apparently, the labyrinth's ancient keepers liked a good drama. A sudden gust slammed a door shut behind us, sealing us in a chamber where the floor was slick with a viscous, amber-colored slime that smelled like burnt popcorn and old shoes. We slipped, slid, and laughed like kids on a greasy slide, all the while the echoing wishes muttered about overdue taxes and missed buses. In the center stood a pedestal of cracked marble, pulsing with a soft blue light that felt like the calm after a roller coaster's final drop. With trembling hands, we placed our intertwined fingers on the stone, and the labyrinth shivered, as if acknowledging our shared resolve. The heart of the maze revealed itself as a vaulted garden where moonbeams filtered through cracked skylights, painting the mossy floor with silver ribbons. Above us, a chorus of night insects performed a jazzy riff that reminded me of a 90s sitcom laugh track, while fireflies danced like tiny disco balls. We stood there, breathless, feeling the weight of our regrets melt away like ice cream on a summer sidewalk. The trust we had forged turned the labyrinth's echoing corridors into a friendly hallway of old friends swapping stories over cheap coffee. As we emerged back into Dream City's neon glow, the stars above winked knowingly, and we both whispered, "Next time, let's bring snacks." At the very heart of the winding labyrinth, where stone walls mutter centuries-old gossip, the hidden constellation flared to life like a reluctant firefly. Its first pulse painted the cobblestones with a soft, sapphire wash that seemed to melt the night's chill. The light spilled outward, turning the narrow alleys into rivers of liquid starlight that lapped at the rooftops of Dream City. Even the street lamps, those tired old veterans of the night, bowed their bulbs in humble reverence. From the shadows, the restless spirits stirred, their translucent forms shimmering like spilled milk in a moonlit kitchen. Instead of brandishing spectral swords, they floated forward with sighs that smelled faintly of old parchment and regret. In a twist worthy of a sitcom plot, they offered forgiveness, handing out apologies like free samples at a market stall. Their irony was palpable. After centuries of haunting, they now wanted a hug and a cup of warm tea. Myra stepped into the glowing center, clutching her lyre as if it were a passport to another realm. She sang a melody that wove through the starlight, each note a thread of amber silk stitching the night together. The song's cadence brushed against the spirit's ears, coaxing tears that tasted of sweet rain on dry earth. As her voice rose, the cascade of light steadied, sealing the piece with a resonance that even the city's ancient bells could hear. Below, the citizens of Dream City emerged from their windows, eyes wide as saucers, mouths forming silent O's of awe. The air filled with the scent of jasmine and roasted chestnuts, a comforting perfume that made the night feel like a cozy blanket rather than a void. Children giggled, chasing the glittering reflections that danced on puddles, while old men tipped their hats in a salute that could have been a nod to a long-lost king. Even the stray cats, those nocturnal philosophers, paused to stare up, whiskers twitching in reverent admiration. When the final chord faded, the constellations settled into a steady glow, a celestial handshake that bound the living and the ethereal alike. The labyrinth's walls, once echoing with restless murmurs, now hummed a gentle lullaby that promised tomorrow's dreams. Myra lowered her lyre, her smile as bright as the stars she had coaxed, and whispered, "We've got this, universe." Thus, under the title of Celestial Convergence, Dream City slipped into a night of tranquil wonder, its heart beating in time with the heavens. When the first pale fingers of dawn stretched over Dream City, the night's lingering constellations still clung to the sky like glittery confetti after a fireworks show. The air smelled of wet cobblestones and the faint, sweet perfume of night-blooming jasmine that refused to surrender to daylight. Street lamps flickered out one by one, their amber ghosts sighing into the morning. Marauders of the night, roving cats with swaggering tails, yawned and slunk back into alleys, leaving only the soft scuffle of their paws on stone. Even the river, usually a mirror for moonlight, now reflected the shy blush of sunrise, as if embarrassed by its own brilliance. Myra, clutching the lantern that had once cradled a whole galaxy of whispered wishes, waddled through the market square like a tired barista delivering the last espresso of the night. She found Leo perched on a low wall, polishing his boots with a rag that looked suspiciously like a discarded superhero cape. With a theatrical flourish, she tipped the lantern back into his hands, the glass humming as if it remembered the last time it had been used to signal a pirate invasion. Leo raised an eyebrow, then a grin, promising, "I'll guard this glow like a dragon guards its hoard, except I'll be less fire-breathy and more coffee-sipping." The crowd around them chuckled, half because of the joke, half because a stray pigeon had just pooped on the mayor's ceremonial hat. Leo swore an oath louder than a medieval troubadour at a tavern, vowing to keep the night's peace alive even as the sun stretched its golden limbs. He declared that the lantern would shine at the heart of Dream City's watchtower, a beacon for any lost soul who might wander back from the realm of restless dreams. The promise tasted sweet, like honey drizzled over burnt toast, unexpectedly delightful yet slightly alarming. A nearby baker, overhearing the vow, whispered that if Leo kept his word, the city's croissants would rise without butter, a miracle no one could afford. Leo winked, replying that miracles were just good timing and a lot of caffeine, and the crowd erupted in applause that sounded like a chorus of clanking armor. As the sun finally claimed the sky, citizens spilled onto the streets like beans from an over-eager coffee grinder, each step kicking up a chorus of cobblestone clacks and distant rooster crows. Vendors unfurled stalls brimming with steaming dumplings, their aroma mingling with the sharp scent of fresh paint on newly repaired walls. Children chased bubbles that glimmered like tiny planets, laughing until their throats felt like sandpaper. Elderly women, perched on wrought iron benches, swapped stories about the night's constellations, their voices weaving nostalgia with a hint of mischief about the time a rogue comet stole a mayor's toupee. Even the river seemed to hum a hopeful tune, its ripples catching the light and turning the water into liquid sunrise. And so, under the gentle promise of dawn, Dream City inhaled a new day, its heart beating in sync with the lantern's soft glow still echoing from the watchtower. The sky, now a canvas of pastel blues, retained a faint shimmer of the night's constellations, as if the stars were leaving behind a glittery afterglow for the morning to wear. People walked with shoulders back, eyes bright, carrying the night's peace like a secret pocket knife, sharp enough to cut through doubt, yet safe enough to keep close. In the distance, Leo stood watch, a sentinel with a grin, ready to swap his coffee for a night shift whenever the city needed another lullaby of light. Thus, the city learned that dawn is not just a sunrise, but a promise whispered by the universe, and Dream City answered with a chorus of hopeful, slightly mischievous human hearts. The moon draped Lyrath's marble avenues in silvery ribbons, turning every gutter and cobblestone into a reflective runway for nocturnal ghosts. Island, the city's iron-willed night watcher, paced the western ramparts with a lantern that sputtered like a stubborn dragonfly. Beside her, Kesh the scribe shuffled his scrolls, his ink-stained fingers twitching as if they'd just typed the final season of a binge-worthy series. The air smelled of baked figs and distant sea salt, a reminder that even ancient stones can get a whiff of fresh gossip. Together they stood, the city's pulse humming beneath their boots like a low bass soundtrack. A low, rhythmic whisper rose from the very foundations, threading through the stone like a mischievous cat slipping under a door. It ticked in a pattern that reminded Kesh of his grandfather's metronome, steady, relentless, and oddly comforting. Island's ears pricked. She swore she'd heard the same sigh when the baker's dough rose too early. The sound swirled around them, mixing with the scent of oil lamps and the faint, metallic tang of rusted armor left to decay. Both felt the city's ancient heart throb, as if it were about to spill a secret older than their grandmother's bedtime tales. Kesh crouched near a cracked column, pulling out a parchment that looked like it had survived a zombie apocalypse of ink. He whispered, "If this is a trap, at least it's got better ambience than the Senate chambers." Island cracked a grin, her armor clanking like a karaoke machine out of tune, and replied, "Just keep your eyes open. This isn't a Netflix binge. It's a live-action thriller." They followed the whisper down a spiral stair, the stone walls sweating with condensation and the occasional drip of ancient sewage that smelled like forgotten cheese. Their lanterns flickered, casting shadows that performed an accidental slapstick dance on the walls. At the lowest vault, they uncovered a cavernous chamber lined with glyphs that glowed faintly, as if the walls themselves were reading a midnight tweet. The whisper coalesced into a chant, recounting a pact sealed by Lyrath's founders. A promise to bind a restless spirit beneath the city in exchange for prosperity. The spirit, a disgruntled water nymph named Selene, had grown impatient, her sighs now a warning that the pact was cracking like old pottery. Nyland's hand tightened around her spear, while Kesh frantically scribbled the verses, muttering, "I should have taken that ancient curses for dummies class." The air grew heavy, tasting of iron and old regret, as the moonlight slipped through a crack above, spotlighting the looming danger. With the chant half remembered, Island shouted a command that sounded suspiciously like a line from an old war movie. "Hold the line, you slippery myth." The nymph's wail rose, then faded, leaving a silence so thick you could hear a mouse hiccup. Kesh tucked the glyphs into his satchel, promising to write a ballad that would make bards weep and tavern patrons laugh. As they climbed back to the moon-kissed streets, the city seemed to sigh in relief, its marble veins pulsing with renewed vigor. Yet the silver ribbons of moonlight still twitched, hinting that another whisper might rise when the next moon is full, and the night watcher will have to answer once more. The moon hung like a silver coin over the ancient city's bazaar, casting long shadows between stalls that smelled of cumin, smoked fish, and the sweet rot of overripe figs. Nyland's boots kicked up dust that glittered like tiny stars, while Kesh tugged at his cloak, ears tuned to the low murmur of whispered rumors. The night market thrummed like a restless heart, vendors shouting over the clatter of copper pots and the occasional squeak of a stray cat on a tin roof. Their guide, a wisp of rumor about a lost lantern, had led them here, and every lantern flickered like a nervous firefly, half lit and half hopeful. Even the wind seemed to carry a conspiratorial giggle, as if the city itself were winking at their daring. Beneath the canopy of lanterns, a grizzled spice merchant named Hakim waved a trembling hand, his voice cracking like old parchment as he spoke of lanterns that vanished into thin air. "They were the eyes of the night," he rasped. "Now only the scent of cardamom and burnt oil remains." Island leaned in, catching the tang of turmeric and the sour bite of fermented dates, while Kesh noted a half-hidden trapdoor behind a mound of saffron threads. The merchant whispered of a hidden chamber beneath the spice stalls, a room said to hold the city's forgotten pulse. The crowd around them shifted, their shadows merging into a tapestry of intrigue and the occasional stray dog that barked at its own reflection. Just as they plotted a route through the labyrinth of barrels, a flash of midnight black darted between the stalls. Zara, the bazaar's most notorious thief, whose reputation was as sharp as her daggers. She snatched the crumpled map from Kesh's grasp with a grin that could have sold sand in a desert, disappearing into a cloud of incense smoke. The Thieves' Guild's favorite joke was that Zara could steal the moon itself, and tonight she proved it by pilfering their only guide. Island cursed under her breath, feeling the sting of betrayal like a slap from a street vendor's angry wife. Yet the chase sparked a strange camaraderie, The thieves of the night and the seekers of truth were both chasing the same flickering shadows. In her haste, Zara knocked over a stack of copper pots, sending a cascade of clanging metal that revealed a slab of stone hidden beneath the mess. The stone bore a cryptic symbol, a coiled serpent devouring its own tail, the ancient Ouroboros, etched deep enough to catch the moon's light like a tattoo. Zara, oblivious to the significance, muttered an apology and slipped the map back into Island's hand, the symbol now glinting on the edge of the parchment. The air grew thick with the scent of iron and burnt incense, and Kesh felt a shiver run down his spine, as if the city itself whispered, "You found the key, now unlock the door." Even the bustling crowd seemed to pause, the hum of haggling turning into a low, reverent hum. With the symbol in hand, Island and Kesh exchanged a look that said, "Time to play detective, but with extra drama." They followed the faint echo of the stone's outline, slipping past a line of bewildered merchants who were more interested in bargaining for a sack of figs than ancient mysteries. The hidden chamber yawned open like a secret mouth, exhaling a stale breath of centuries, and the duo stepped inside, their lanterns trembling like nervous teenagers at a concert. As they descended, the whispers turned into a chorus, promising answers and perhaps a few more vanished lanterns to chase. And somewhere above, Zara laughed, a sound that sounded suspiciously like the clink of coins, knowing she'd just handed them the map to the city's most deliciously dangerous secret. The trio Lyra, a streetwise archivist, Joran, a grizzled ex-guard, and tiny, sarcastic automaton Pip, clutched the silver sigil that pulsed like a heart under moonlight. The symbol's faint glow traced the winding cobblestones, leading them through alleys that smelled of roasted figs and rusted iron. Ahead, the temple of Selene rose, its marble facade scarred by centuries of weather, its towers draped in silvery vines that whispered like old lovers. Moonbeams slashed the stone, turning cracks into rivers of light, and the air grew colder, as if the night itself were inhaling. Even Pip's gears whirred in a nervous rhythm, muttering that they were about to walk into a real-life Dungeons and Dragons campaign. As they stepped through the massive bronze doors, a legion of stone guardians stirred, their eyes flickering with phosphorescent moss. The statues, half human, half serpent, shifted with a grinding sigh that sounded like a subway car braking on wet tracks. Joran raised his battered spear, only to discover the blade was as effective as a plastic sword against a granite bull. Lyra laughed, pointing out that the Guardians seemed more interested in polishing their own armor than in fighting, a cosmic irony that would make a Greek tragedy blush. Pip, ever the commentator, quipped that they were now starring in a Night at the Museum sequel, minus the witty museum director. The Guardians posed riddles, each one echoing from the temple's vaulted chambers like a bored librarian reciting overdue notices. "I speak without a mouth, hear without ears, what am I?" a stone sphinx asked, its voice reverberating off the frescoes of forgotten gods. Lyra answered with a grin, "Your echo, you overgrown marble selfie stick," and the stone's eyes dimmed in reluctant approval. Joran, meanwhile, wrestled with a paradox about time that would have made Doctor Who spin his TARDIS in circles. When they finally solved the final riddle, a tongue-twisting verse about moonlit shadows, the temple doors groaned open, revealing a dim corridor scented with damp incense and something unmistakably like old cheese. From deeper within, a chorus of whispers rose, weaving together like a mournful chant that could curdle milk. The sound brushed against their ears, cool as night breezes but heavy with the weight of centuries of regret. Each syllable tasted of iron and ash, as if the temple itself were exhaling a sigh after a long, bad karaoke night. Pip tried to filter the noise with his internal speaker, only to end up broadcasting a remix of the chant that sounded suspiciously like a 90s power ballad. The trio felt the vibrations in their bones, a reminder that the very walls were alive, humming a warning that something terrible lay sealed below. At the heart of the chamber, a stone sarcophagus pulsed with a dark, liquid glow, the sealed relic that the Whispers feared. Legends claimed that if the relic awakened, it would spill night like ink across the city, drowning lanterns and street vendors in perpetual darkness. Lyra's hand hovered over the ancient lock, her pulse quickening as if she'd just watched the final season of her favorite series. No spoilers, just dread. Joran muttered that they were about to unleash a cosmic blackout, a scenario that would make even the city's night watcher retire early. With a collective breath, they sealed the relic once more, the temple sighing in relief, and the moonlight slipped back through the cracks, promising that the city would see sunrise, at least until the next mythic misadventure. The torchlight flickered against the basalt walls as Island and her band slipped past the last echoing footfall. They entered the inner sanctum, where the air smelled of damp stone and forgotten incense, thick as a grandma's stew. In the center of the vaulted chamber rested the lunar core, a crystal the size of a man's fist, humming like a cat on a hot tin roof. Its surface pulsed with a cold, silver light that painted the faces of the explorers with ghostly crescents. Legend whispered that the core was bound by ancient vows, a promise older than the city's first brick, and breaking it could unspool time itself. Just as they reached out, the cavern door thundered open, and a ragged band of iron-clad soldiers poured in, led by the scarred warlord Darius. Darius swaggered like a villain from a 90s action movie, his armor clanking louder than a subway at rush hour. He snarled that the core would power his army, turning the city's night into an endless fireworks display of conquest. The scent of sweat, horse urine, and cheap leather filled the chamber, mingling with the lingering incense in a pungent cocktail. Island's eyes narrowed. She could feel the tension crackle like static before a thunderstorm, and the ancient vows seemed to hum louder, as if annoyed by the intruders. The moon, swollen and full, poured silver through a crack in the ceiling, bathing the battle in a surreal glow. Steel sang against steel as swords clanged, and the clangor echoed off the stone like a chorus of angry cicadas. Darius swung his massive war axe, sending a spray of dust that smelled of iron and broken dreams across the floor. Island ducked, feeling the wind of a near miss brush her cheek, and retaliated with a flurry of daggers that glittered like fireworks on New Year's Eve. The clash was as chaotic as a reality TV cooking showdown, with each side trying to outspice the other, while the lunar core pulsed, indifferent to the human drama. When the fighting paused for a breath, the core's light flared, casting a blinding crescent across the battlefield. In that fleeting moment, Island saw the city beyond the temple walls, its rooftops slick with rain, its streets alive with market cries and the smell of frying fish. She realized that destroying the core would unleash a wave of raw lunar energy that could raise the city, but leaving it intact meant Darius would wield its power to enslave every citizen. The choice gnawed at her like a mouse in a pantry, each option a bitter pill coated in the sweet promise of salvation or ruin. With a steadying breath, she whispered a promise to the ancient vows, feeling the weight of generations press on her shoulders like 100 gossiping grandmothers. As the full moon reached its apex, Island stepped forward, her hand hovering over the crystal as if it were a reluctant pizza topping. She raised her blade, not to strike, but to shatter the binding sigils etched in silver around the core, hoping the fracture would release its power harmlessly. The sigils cracked with a sound like breaking glass, and a surge of lunar light burst outward, washing the warriors in a glow that turned armor to silver statues for a heartbeat. Darius stumbled back, his bravado melting like ice cream in July, while the temple's stone walls trembled, exhaling a sigh that smelled faintly of ozone and old books. In the end, the city was saved, the core lay dormant, and Island walked out into the night, humming a tune from an old tavern, wondering if the moon ever gets a day off. When the first amber fingers of sunrise slipped over Lyrath's crumbling towers, the city exhaled a sigh that smelled of wet stone and burnt incense. The sacrificial seal on the core glimmered like a freshly polished coin, humming a low lullaby that the night's whispers could no longer drown. Lanterns flickered out one by one, their soot-blackened glass clinking against the cobblestones as if to say good night to the shadows. A stray breeze tugged at the market stalls, scattering the stale scent of stale bread and yesterday's fish into the cool air. Even the river, usually a grumbling gossip, paused to reflect the newborn light like a nervous teenager checking their reflection. Island perched on the western wall, her boots still caked in mud from the night's frantic scramble, and muttered, "Well, that was more dramatic than a season finale of Game of Thrones." Beside her, Kesh adjusted his battered helm, chuckling that the only thing louder than the ancient chants was the rooster that now crowed like a broken alarm clock. Zara, ever the pragmatist, surveyed the city with a grin, noting that the walls looked cleaner than a celebrity's Instagram feed after a Photoshop session. The trio shared a loaf of stale rye, the crust crunching like distant artillery, while the sun painted their silhouettes in gold. Their laughter rose above the murmur of the waking city, a reminder that even heroes need a good joke after a world-saving ordeal. Below them, Lyrath streets began to stir, vendors arranging piles of fragrant spices that tickled the nostrils with cumin and cumin-laden promises of tomorrow's stew. The ancient stones, once rattled by restless spirits, now seemed to settle into a rhythm as steady as a marching band's drumline. Children emerged from hidden alleys, their eyes wide with the kind of wonder that only a night of whispered danger can birth. The city, breathing in the warm air, felt as if it were inhaling hope and exhaling a quiet promise that the next moon would find it untroubled. In that moment, the past's shadows slipped into the corners, making room for a future bright enough to blind a vampire. Irony, that mischievous trickster, strutted across the rooftops, wearing a cape made of discarded scrolls that proclaimed, "We survived because we forgot the password." Kesh, ever the skeptic, joked that the core's seal must have been set by an ancient IT department, complete with a reset button hidden under a cursed statue. Zara rolled her eyes, pointing out that the only thing more stubborn than the ancient magic was the city's drainage system, which still managed to spray a stray cat with a fountain of murky water. Island, meanwhile, whispered a thank you to the moon for its night-long surveillance, comparing it to a nosy neighbor with a telescope. The sunrise painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, as if the heavens themselves were blushing over the city's narrow escape. As the sun climbed higher, the three friends descended the wall, their shadows stretching long and lazy across the marble squares. They paused at the central fountain, now sputtering out a gentle spray that sounded suspiciously like a lullaby humming from a distant speaker. Lyrath, still damp with the night's sweat, seemed to straighten its back, ready to face whatever tales the next moon would spin. The promise of peace settled over the city like a soft blanket, warm enough to fend off the chill of forgotten horrors. And somewhere, deep within the sealed core, the last echo of the whispers dissolved into a sigh, as content as a cat finally finding a sunbeam. In the mist-shrouded town of Lion, the river curled like a silver serpent through cracked stone alleys, and the air smelled of damp bamboo and early autumn rot. Young lantern maker May swept the cobblestones outside her workshop, her hands stained with soot and the faint scent of jasmine incense that clung to her apron. Beside her, the venerable river elder, Master Joe, adjusted his weather-worn hat and muttered prayers to the river spirit, a ritual as old as the town's first wooden bridge. This year marked the inaugural Lantern Festival, a night when lanterns would float like fireflies, guiding the spirit's goodwill back to the thirsty banks. Yet a relentless drought gnawed at the fields, threatening to swallow the glow before it even sparked, setting the stage for a clash between reverence and survival. May's workshop overflowed with bamboo frames, cracked porcelain, and jars of melted wax that glimmered like captured sunrise. The clang of hammer on bamboo rang louder than the gossip of market women, while the smell of pine resin mixed with the sour tang of fermenting rice wine. Her mischievous cat, Whisker, leapt onto a drying lantern, sending a cascade of glittering paper fluttering like startled moths, prompting May to laugh. Even the cat thinks we're over-decorating. She threaded silk ribbons through the lanterns with the precision of a calligrapher, each knot a promise that the river would remember its own reflection. Outside, the river's surface lay cracked and glitter-free, a mirror to the town's anxiety, as if the water itself were waiting for a cue to join the party. Master Joe gathered the elders on the riverbank, their robes rustling like ancient scrolls as they formed a circle around a stone altar soaked in centuries of rain. He recited verses that sounded like a mash-up of Confucian wisdom and a badly dubbed kung fu movie, insisting the river spirit liked a good story and a decent snack. He warned that lighting too many lanterns on the parched banks could ignite the reeds, turning the celebration into a scene straight out of a post-apocalyptic Game of Thrones episode, minus the dragons, unfortunately. The drought had turned the river into a thin, muddy ribbon, and Joe's voice cracked. We cannot ask the spirit to dance when the floor is sand, an irony not lost on the younger folk. Still, the elders clutched their incense sticks, inhaling the bitter smoke as if it could conjure rain, their eyes glinting with stubborn hope. The townspeople gathered, clutching bundles of lanterns like nervous children holding onto candy, their faces smeared with dust and a hint of sweat. A grumbling farmer muttered, "If we burn these things, we'll scorch the last sprouts," while a teenage girl whispered, "At least we'll look cool on TikTok," earning a chuckle from May. The conflict crackled louder than the lantern wicks. Tradition demanded a luminous tribute. Survival begged for water to be saved for the fields. Ironically, the very fire meant to honor the river threatened to dry up the reeds that protected the banks from erosion, a paradox that made Master Joe sigh like a kettle about to boil over. Yet the crowd's murmurs rose in a chorus. each voice a thread weaving the tapestry of a festival that might either revive the spirit or drown the town in ash. As night deepened, May slipped away to the hidden spring behind the old tea house, where water still gurgled like a mischievous sprite refusing to be silenced. She filled a sack with the cool liquid, doused the base of each lantern, and whispered, "If the river won't give, we'll give it a drink," a line that would make any motivational poster blush. The lanterns, now dripping with water, glowed with a soft, amber hue, their light flickering like shy fireflies that had just discovered a bathtub. When the procession finally floated the lanterns downstream, the river caught the reflections and for a trembling moment seemed to sigh, sending a thin ribbon of mist upward like a sigh of relief. The townsfolk cheered, Master Joe tipped his hat, and even the cat, now drenched, shook off like a soggy towel, proving that a little ingenuity and a splash of irony could light up even the darkest, driest night. The river sighs as it pulls back, exposing a cracked mudflat that smells of wet earth and stale fish guts. Lanterns bob on the water like fireflies trapped in glass, their paper skins trembling in the evening breeze. May crouches beside the last floating lantern, her fingers stained with soot and jasmine oil, and whispers a prayer to the river spirit. The crowd behind her hums an old folk tune, a melody as familiar as a ringtone on a vintage Nokia. Even the cicadas seem to pause, as if waiting for the night to decide its fate. May's mother, a stern woman with knotted eyebrows, thrusts a bundle of rice paper onto the table and declares the lantern craft is a dying art that drains their meager coin. "Your father built a house with his hands, not with glitter," she snaps, the words cracking like a cracked pot. The family's pantry reeks of fermented tofu, a reminder that they survive on scraps while the festival demands gold-leafed brilliance. May feels the weight of generations pressing down, each expectation a stone in her satchel. Yet she clings to the hope that a single perfect lantern could light a path out of poverty. Enter Jiao, the sly leader of the iron-forged lantern guild, swaggering in with a grin wider than a dragon's grin on a meme. His crew rolls out lanterns forged from black steel, humming with a metallic clang that sounds like a distant train. Yes, the bullet train of the 21st century they brag about. Jiao offers May a shortcut, a hybrid lantern with a steel frame and paper skin, promising it will glow brighter and cost half as much. The scent of hot iron mixes with the river's musk, creating an oddly comforting perfume of progress and danger. May eyes the gleaming contraption, wondering if she's about to sell out or simply upgrade her grandma's ancient Wi-Fi. The town square erupts in debate, voices clashing like cymbals in a marching band. Elders argue the festival must be cancelled, fearing the river spirit's wrath will flood the streets like a bad sequel to Titanic. Youngsters chant for the iron lanterns, shouting tech over tradition, as if they were cheering for a superhero movie. The air thickens with incense smoke and the sour tang of fermented cabbage, making everyone's throat feel like sandpaper. Amid the chaos, a lone fisherman mutters that the river only cares about one thing, a good story to tell the fish. When the moon finally climbs, May stands at the water's edge, a half-paper, half-steel lantern trembling in her palm. She lights it, and the flame flickers like a nervous actor forgetting his lines, then steadies into a warm, amber glow that reflects off the river's dark skin. The crowd holds its breath, the tension snapping like a rubber band when a child giggles, comparing the glow to a lightsaber from a galaxy far, far away. the river spirit rises, a silvery ripple that smells of rain on hot pavement and seems to nod approvingly at the hybrid creation. May smiles, realizing that sometimes the current whispers not just about loss, but about daring to forge a new path. May unfolded the brittle parchment, its edges crumbling like an ancient scroll on a caffeine binge. The scroll crackled in her hands, sounding eerily like an old vinyl record skipping on a rainy night. It whispered of a hidden spring deep beneath the riverbank, the very source that once fed the lantern oil of the first festivals. She felt the weight of centuries pressing against her shoulders, a mix of reverence and restless curiosity. A grin cracked across her face, as bright as a lantern about to pop. The riverbank at dusk glowed amber, the water shimmering like liquid gold spilled by a careless deity. Reeds swayed like drunken dancers, their tips brushing the surface with a soft rustle. The scent of wet earth mingled with the faint aroma of fermented tea, a reminder that even nature enjoys a good brew. Beneath layers of silt, the hidden spring lay waiting, its crystal veins pulsing beneath the mud. It had once fed the oil that lit the first festivals, a secret now bubbling up for May to discover. May slipped into the night, her footsteps silent as a cat on a silk rug. Her boots sank into muck that squelched like a soggy sandwich, sending tiny splashes into the dark water. She pushed through reeds that snagged her sleeves like jealous exes refusing to let go. The moon painted silver ribbons on the river, turning each ripple into a fleeting mirror. A chorus of crickets provided a low-budget soundtrack, their chirps punctuating the hush like comic book sound effects. She found the yawning mouth of an ancient tunnel, its entrance gaping like a dragon's throat. Its walls were slick with algae that smelled like old socks left in a locker for decades. She lit a lantern, its flame flickering like a nervous debutante at a royal ball. Inside, the air tasted of iron and forgotten promises, a metallic tang that made her throat dry. She navigated twists that seemed designed by a mischievous maze maker, each turn more confounding than the last. At one point a bat swooped past, and she shouted, "Not today, Batman." At the tunnel's heart, the spring bubbled clear as jade, singing a soft hymn that echoed the tide of secrets whispered by the river. May filled a clay jar, feeling the pulse of centuries thrum through her fingertips. She imagined the first lanterns bobbing on the water like floating emojis, their glow flickering against the night sky. With a wink to destiny, she slipped back through the reeds, knowing the upcoming festival would shine brighter thanks to her midnight dive. The river, now aware of its own legend, seemed to hum a satisfied sigh. The moon hung low over the ancient riverbank, its silver grin spilling over the reeds like a tired lantern thief. Villagers swarmed the banks, their chatter a stew of anticipation, clinking ceramic cups and the occasional stray goat bleat. May slipped through the crowd, cradling a cracked tin of luminous oil that smelled of pine sap and burnt midnight toast. Her boots squelched in the mud, each step a reminder that even sacred nights have gritty, muddy feet. The air trembled with incense, firecrackers, and the faint promise of something magical about to ignite. With a flick of her wrist, May tipped the oil into a brass lantern, and a sudden blaze licked the wick like a dragon's tongue on a midnight snack. The lantern's glow burst forth, spilling amber light onto the river's surface, turning the water into a molten gold ribbon. One by one, lanterns rose, bobbing and drifting like fireflies on a caffeine binge, their reflections wobbling in the gentle current. The crowd gasped, some shouting, "Whoa," as if they'd just seen a low-budget fantasy film come to life. Even the old storyteller, who'd claimed he'd seen everything, whispered, "Now that's a light show even the gods would binge watch." The river spirit, a shimmering silhouette of water and moonlight, stirred from its centuries-old slumber, its presence rippling like a hologram glitch in a video game. It rose in a cascade of liquid glass, lifting the low, grumbling clouds that had tried to hide the night's spectacle. The spirit's voice was a soft, gurgling laugh that sounded oddly like a kettle about to whistle, and it brushed the lanterns with a cool, silvery mist. Villagers felt a sudden chill on their skin, as if the spirit had handed them a frosty soda on a hot day. The scene was so surreal that a child shouted, "It's like Avatar meets a Chinese lantern shop." Then, with a theatrical sigh, the heavens cracked open, and rain began to fall in a torrent that smelled like fresh petrichor mixed with the oily tang of maize lantern wax. The droplets hammered the river's surface, turning the glowing reflections into a jittery disco ball of light and water. Mud splashed onto faces, turning smiles into mud-streaked masks, and the scent of wet earth rose like an old library's perfume. Even the river spirit chuckled, its laughter now a splashy percussion that made the drums of the marching band sound like a distant heartbeat. The rain, relentless yet oddly comforting, turned the festival into a wet, wild, and wonderfully chaotic celebration. When the downpour finally eased, the lanterns glowed brighter, their flames dancing against the rain-slicked river like neon swords in a samurai movie. The water surged, carrying the lanterns downstream in a luminous parade that painted the night with ribbons of gold and crimson. Spectators stood drenched, shivering and laughing, their hair plastered to their foreheads like soggy noodles, yet their eyes sparkled with awe. The river spirit, now fully awakened, lifted the remaining clouds, revealing a sky studded with stars that winked in approval. In that breathtaking finale, light and water wove together, sealing the night's legend, a story the villagers would retell for generations, each time with a splash of humor and a splash of rain. The river, swollen from spring rains, roared like a dragon awakened. Townsfolk spilled onto the banks, their laughter ricocheting off the water's froth. The scent of sizzling street food, spicy tofu, sweet rice cakes, and a hint of river mud filled the air. Drums pounded, and children chased fireflies that dared to compete with the first lanterns. Even the old magistrate, who usually frowned at merriment, cracked a grin as bright as the sunrise. When the flood threatened to swallow the market, May waded in with a bamboo pole and a grin. She tied a massive net to a stubborn oak, pulling debris like a superhero in a low-budget kung fu flick. The crowd gasped as she lifted a soggy cart of lanterns, declaring, "If I can't save the fish, at least I'll save the light." Her daring stunt turned into legend faster than a viral meme, and the bards sang about May, the river tamer with a heart of fire. Ironically, the very lantern she rescued flickered out just as the night fell, prompting a chorus of oops from the onlookers. That night, the Lantern Festival ignited like a sky full of fireflies on caffeine. Hundreds of paper lanterns bobbed on the water, their crimson and gold skins reflecting the river's oily sheen. The crackle of burning wax mingled with the distant croak of frogs, creating a symphony that could make even a monk smile. People whispered wishes into the glowing orbs, wealth, love, a good harvest, and for some, simply a clean pair of socks after the mud fest. When a stray lantern tipped and splashed into the current, it sent a spray of hot oil that sizzled like a street food stall gone rogue, eliciting shrieks and laughter in equal measure. Year after year, the lanterns rose again, each one a tiny ember of memory tethered to the riverbank. Children now chase the glowing beads like Jedi apprentices hunting their own lightsabers, shouting, "May the light be with you." Elders point to the oldest lantern, still smudged with river grime, and say it carries the scent of May's bravery, a mix of wet bamboo and burnt incense. The sight of those lanterns swaying in the night wind reminds newcomers that hope can float even on a river that once tried to drown it. And if you listen closely, you can still hear the faint echo of May's laugh, ricocheting off the water like a mischievous ghost. So the town's calendar now marks the festival not just as a party, but as a ritual of rebirth, a reminder that even the murkiest waters can shine. When tourists ask why the lanterns never dim, the locals wink and answer, because we keep adding fresh stories to the fire. The river, once a menace, now plays the role of a reluctant stagehand, splashing applause for each new glow. In the end, the embers of memory flicker on, stitching past and future with threads of light, laughter, and a dash of soggy adventure. And if you ever doubt the power of a single lantern, just remember, even a busted phone screen can still project a galaxy if you stare at it long enough. When the sun finally slipped behind the jagged silhouettes of the old town's crumbling towers, the sky bruised into a deep violet that smelled faintly of burnt pine and stale ale. Yaron, the town's humble cobbler, slammed the last leather strap on a pair of mud-splattered boots, his hands still tingling from the day's toil. A gust of wind rattled the crooked shutters, scattering a chorus of pigeons that clucked like a badly dubbed cartoon. He wiped the sweat from his brow with a rag that had seen more souls than a shoe store in a zombie apocalypse, and stepped out onto the cobblestones, unaware that twilight was about to hand him a relic. Halfway down the alley that smelled of fermented cheese and old rain, Aaron's boot struck something hard and metallic, sending a jolt up his leg like a surprise electric shock. He knelt, brushed away grime, and uncovered an ancient bell, its surface silvered to a ghostly sheen that reflected the dying light like a disco ball at a medieval rave. The bell gave a low, resonant toll that seemed to vibrate the very stones beneath his feet, a sound that only the hour of dusk could coax. As the echo faded, a thin wisp of incense like perfume rose, mingling with the scent of wet stone and the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer, making Aaron wonder if the town's ghosts were finally getting a bedtime story. Legend whispered in the tavern that the bell was the voice of the Twilight Guardians, a cadre of spectral protectors who once patrolled the city when night tried to swallow it whole. According to the old bard, they were as swift as a cat on a caffeine binge, and as silent as a librarian on a Sunday. Aaron, who had never believed in anything beyond leather soles and stubborn customers, felt a shiver crawl up his spine, as if someone had turned the thermostat up to spooky. He laughed nervously, muttering that if the Guardians showed up, they'd better bring pizza, because the town's night watch was about as effective as a screen door on a submarine. The bell's toll seemed to pull at the very fabric of the evening, and from the shadows emerged silhouettes that glimmered like stained glass warriors, armor polished to a mirror finish, helmets shaped like the moon's crescent, and capes that fluttered with the scent of ozone after a thunderstorm. Their eyes glowed a soft amber, recalling the warm glow of a vintage arcade cabinet, and they moved with the grace of a ballet troupe that had just discovered espresso. One guardian, brandishing a spear that sang when it struck the air, tipped his helmet and gave Aaron a nod that said, "We've been waiting for a new cobbler-turned-hero, and no, we don't accept returns." The irony wasn't lost on Aaron. After all, he spent his mornings fixing souls, and now he was about to mend the city's very soul. As the last note of the bell faded into the night, the guardians vanished like smoke from a chimney, leaving behind a lingering hum that tickled Aaron's ears. He tucked the silvered bell into his leather satchel, its weight a reminder that even the most ordinary hands can hold extraordinary stories. The twilight deepened, painting the rooftops with shades of charcoal and ember, while the smell of fresh bread from a nearby bakery drifted in, promising a new dawn. With a grin that mixed awe and a dash of mischief, Aaron whispered, "Well, guess it's time to stitch up the darkness, one legend at a time," and set off toward the market, his boots clacking like a marching band on a cobblestone runway. The bazaar roared like a fevered dragon, stalls bursting with glittering copperware, sizzling kebabs, and the sweet rot of overripe figs. A low, mournful toll of a bell, like a giant's alarm clock, slipped through the clamor, setting every trader's eyebrows on fire. Word spread faster than gossip about a royal scandal, and soon curious eyes and greedy hands crowded the dusty lanes. Even the street cats paused, ears twitching, as if the sound promised a fresh fish or a fresh catastrophe. The air grew thick with the smell of incense and sweat, a perfume that whispered, "Something's about to go sideways." Yaren, whose scarred cheek resembled a map of past battles, ducked behind a pile of oil-slicked pottery to catch his breath. There he found Lyra, the spice merchant, haggling over a sack of cumin as if it were the last ticket to a concert of the gods. She shot him a look sharper than a serrated pepper grinder and barked, "If you think that bell is a call to prayer, you're about as clueless as a Jedi in a lightsaber shop." Despite the sarcasm, Lyra's eyes glittered with the same hunger that drove every thief in the market, curiosity mixed with the promise of profit. Together they plotted a course through the maze of awnings, their footsteps stirring up clouds of paprika dust that tickled their throats. The first shadow slithered out from under a cracked arch, longer than a summer's day and darker than a moonless night. It moved like a lazy cat, but every time it brushed a merchant's stall, the wares shrank, wilted, or vanished in a puff of stale garlic breath. Lyra gagged on the sour scent of old fish, while Aaron felt the chill of a forgotten tomb crawl up his spine. Passers-by whispered that the bazaar's heart was being swallowed, and a few brave souls swore they saw the shadows nibble at the golden lanterns, leaving them dim as a smartphone on low battery. Even the pigeons, usually plump and indifferent, fluttered away in a frantic V formation that resembled a badly choreographed flash mob. Yaren and Lyra followed the darkness to a narrow alley where the cobblestones were slick with spilled wine and the smell of rot. Lyra cracked open a jar of cracked pepper, scattering fiery specks that made the shadows hiss like a dragon with a bad toothache. When the pepper hit the leading shade, it recoiled, shrieking a sound that sounded suspiciously like a badly tuned kazoo. Aaron lunged, brandishing a rusted dagger that had once sliced a particularly stubborn goat, and the blade sang a metallic note that seemed to wake the very walls. The shadows thinned, revealing a rusted brass bell hidden behind a stack of cracked pottery, its clapper stuck mid-swing like a lazy teenager on a Saturday morning. With a yank, Aaron freed the clapper, and the bell tolled once, twice, sending a wave of light that turned the alley into a sunrise over a coffee shop. The shadows shrank into harmless puddles of soot, slurping up the spilled wine like a thirsty barista. Lyra laughed, tossing the pepper jar into the air, and declared, "Now that's what I call a spicy ending, better than any Netflix finale." The bazaar erupted in cheers, vendors hugging each other, and even the street cats resumed their nap, dreaming of fish that never smelled like doom. But as the crowd dispersed, a faint echo lingered, a reminder that somewhere beyond the market's edge, another bell might be waiting to ring, and the next adventure would begin. The night air in Old Town smelled of damp cobblestones and stale incense, as Aaron and Lyra huddled around a flickering lantern left by an enigmatic old scribe who claimed to be the last of the wordsmiths. The lantern sputtered like a nervous dragon, casting jittery shadows that made the town square look like a stage set for a low-budget fantasy film. Aaron, ever the skeptic, muttered that the scribe probably just wanted a free night's lodging, while Lyra giggled at the thought of a lantern with a better social life than most tavern bards. Yet the lantern's glow pulsed in rhythm with their heartbeats, pulling them toward the cracked stone steps beneath the baker's stall. With a sudden sigh of destiny, or perhaps just a draft, they descended, ready for whatever ancient dust awaited them. The stone stairway yawned into darkness, and the pair's lantern cast a trembling amber pool that flickered against the walls like a shy spotlight on a Broadway debut. Their boots crunched on centuries-old gravel mixed with the sour tang of mildew, while distant pigeons hooted a mournful chorus above the street. The hidden crypt opened into a vaulted chamber, its ceiling dripping with condensation that sounded like the sighs of forgotten ghosts. On the far wall, massive murals sprawled, each brushstroke a story of guardians draped in armor that glittered like sequins at a red carpet gala. Garen swore the figures resembled the town's founding fathers, only taller, more stoic, and oddly reminiscent of a sci-fi movie poster where knights meet robots. Closer inspection revealed a pact etched in pigment. The guardians, towering silhouettes with glowing eyes, extended massive hands toward a crowd of humble townsfolk clutching woven baskets of rye and fresh cheese. The murals crackled with color, depicting a sunrise that seemed to pour honeyed light across the scene, while a subtle scent of baked bread wafted from the painted loaves, making Lyra's stomach rumble in protest. Beneath the image, a cryptic stanza warned, "When twilight kisses the horizon, ring the bell lest the void devour our songs." The irony was palpable. Here they were, in a place that smelled like old laundry and rotting parchment, tasked with a timing job more precise than a watchmaker's jiggle. Suddenly, a stray rat scurried past, slipping on a puddle of aged wine, adding a slapstick soundtrack to their grave discovery. Darren glanced at his pocket watch, though the old mechanism seemed as unreliable as a wizard's promise to return borrowed socks. The bell, a massive bronze relic perched above the town square, rang with the authority of a superhero landing, if superheroes were made of iron and echoed like a church organ after a marathon karaoke session. Lyra, clutching the lantern like a wand, warned that missing the twilight moment would unleash a void that smelled like burnt marshmallows and disappointment. Their feet pounded the cobbles, each step sending up clouds of soot that smelled like a chimney on a cold winter's night, while the distant clamor of a tavern's lute practice tried, hopelessly, to drown out their urgency. Somewhere nearby, a street vendor shouted, "Fresh figs," a reminder that even in apocalypse prepping, commerce never sleeps. At the exact instant the sun's last amber finger brushed the horizon, the lantern's flame flared, casting a golden halo over the bell's rim. Aaron swung the massive hammer with a grunt that sounded like a cartoon character lifting a piano, and the bell sang, a deep, resonant note that rolled through the alleyways like a low-budget superhero theme. The void, a swirling maelstrom of darkness that reeked of stale socks and forgotten deadlines, recoiled, shrinking into a hiss that faded faster than a viral meme. As the echo faded, the murals seemed to wink back at them, their painted guardians now smiling like they'd just watched a particularly good sitcom finale. The lantern dimmed, the scribe's crypt door sealed with a soft thud, and Aaron and Lyra emerged, their clothes smelling of iron, incense, and victory, ready to tell a tale that would outshine even the most over-dramatic Netflix trailer. The sun bled into the old town like a wound, turning the cobblestones a bruised violet as the bell tower loomed against the crimson sky. From the highest balcony, Aaron felt the wind bite his cheeks, tasting rust and old incense that clung to the stone. Below, market stalls still smoldered, their charred vegetables sending a sour, burnt onion perfume into the air. He could hear the distant clang of the great bell, a low, mournful note that seemed to warn of the storm to come. In that moment, the city felt like a stage set for a tragic opera, and Aaron was both lead and understudy. Marek, the counselor with ambitions larger than his waistcoat, marched his loyal cutthroats up the winding stairs, each step echoing like a drumbeat in a marching band that forgot the rhythm. He brandished a silvered spear, its tip dripping with the oily sheen of freshly spilled ale, and declared he would claim the bell for the greater good, a phrase as hollow as a tourist souvenir mug. The iron doors groaned open, releasing a gust of stale smoke that smelled like a dragon's aftershave. Swords flashed, shields sang, and the tower's ancient wood shuddered under the clash, sending splinters flying like confetti at a particularly grim wedding. Even the pigeons, usually indifferent, squawked in protest, as if they'd seen too many political dramas to care. Aaron's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drum solo that threatened to drown out the bell's solemn toll. He remembered the old rite, an ancient pact that demanded the bell's sacrifice to seal the darkness, a ritual as grim as a Netflix true crime documentary, but with more chanting. The thought of giving up his life felt like being asked to hand over the remote control during a binge watch, unthinkable and oddly personal. Yet the darkness creeping from the north smelled of rot and burnt paper, a stench that made his stomach churn like a barf bag at a roller coaster. With a wry grin, he muttered, "Well, if I'm going down, at least I won't have to listen to Marek's speeches again," and tightened his grip on the ceremonial blade. The battle erupted atop the tower like a badly choreographed music video, swords clanging in rhythm with the bell's mournful chime, each strike sending sparks that glittered like cheap fireworks. Marek lunged, his spear thrusting forward as if trying to pierce the heavens, only to be met by Aaron's blade, which sang a metallic sigh reminiscent of a lightsaber duel in a low-budget sci-fi flick. Blood sprayed across the ancient stone, mixing with the rain that began to fall, a cold metallic drizzle that smelled of iron and wet dog. Laughter erupted from a nearby gutter, a stray cat yowling in sync with the chaos, adding a twisted soundtrack to the carnage. As the tower swayed, a stray banner bearing the city's crest ripped free, fluttering like a flag at a protest against the very idea of heroism. When the last echo of steel faded, Aaron stood alone, the bell trembling in his hands as if it too sensed its impending fate. He raised the ceremonial blade, feeling the weight of centuries press into his palm, and whispered the old incantation, his voice cracking like a vinyl record stuck on a bad track. The bell shattered with a thunderous crack that rolled across the rooftops, sending a shockwave that smelled of ozone and burnt incense, washing away the darkness like a cosmic laundry cycle. Marek's ambition crumbled into ash, his coat catching fire in a spectacularly ironic blaze that would make any pyromaniac proud. As the first true dawn painted the town gold, Aaron collapsed, a grin plastered on his soot-blackened face, knowing he'd saved the city, though he'd have to explain the missing bell to the next generation of tourists. When the bronze bell tolled at the exact moment twilight sighed, the lingering void shivered and slipped back into the cobblestones like a bad habit. Lanterns flickered awake, spilling amber light over cracked plaster and the scent of damp bread. The town's shutters creaked open in unison, as if a chorus of sleepy cats had finally decided to stretch. A rooster, perhaps auditioning for a reality show, crowed so loudly it startled a stray dog into a dramatic, slow-motion tumble. Even the river, usually a lazy gossip, whispered a brighter hymn as the first shy rays painted the water gold. Yaren, the blacksmith with arms like forged oak, offered himself to the darkness, and the town still talks about it over mugs of sour ale. They say his heart hammered a rhythm that resonated through the stones, sealing the breach with a sigh of iron and sacrifice. Folks now whisper his name like a secret password, half reverent, half amused, especially when the wind rattles the bell's rope. Children swap tall tales of Aaron wrestling shadows, insisting he wore a cape that would make a superhero jealous. In the tavern, the barkeep jokes that Aaron's ghost still helps him hammer out stubborn bolts, though the only evidence is a sudden clang and a puff of soot. Lyra, who once sold spices that could make a dragon sneeze, now tends the market with a smile as bright as sunrise. Stalls burst with colors, crimson tomatoes, violet figs, and the occasional mystery mushroom that smells like old socks but tastes like triumph. She greets each vendor with a nod that says, "I survived the night, what's your worst nightmare?" The scent of fresh bread mingles with the metallic tang of newly forged tools, creating a perfume that could convince a poet to quit his quill. Even the town's resident pigeon, named Sir Coops a lot, seems to salute her, perched atop the bell rope like a tiny, feathered sentinel. Every sunset now carries the echo of that twilight bell, a low hum that drifts through the alleys like an old lullaby. It rolls over the rooftops, brushing the stone walls with a reminder that guardians once stood where now children play tag. The townsfolk pause, cup of tea in hand, to listen for the lingering chime, feeling a shiver of pride that's half reverence, half wow, we survived a cosmic glitch. Some swear they hear Aaron's hammer in the distant clang, while others blame the gulls for their noisy gossip. In any case, the echo stitches the present to the past, binding each generation with a sound as familiar as a favorite sitcom's theme song. So when the next twilight rolls in, you'll see the old town stretch, yawn, and greet the dawn like a cat spotting a laser pointer, confused but eager. The bell's ghostly resonance will still tease the ears of anyone who cares to listen, like a cosmic joke that never gets old. And if you happen to spot Lyra juggling oranges while reciting a line from Star Wars, "May the market be with you," you'll know the legend lives on in both myth and mundane. The townsfolk, ever the dramatists, will raise a toast to Aaron, to the bell, and to the stubbornness of a place that refuses to be just a footnote. In the end, Dawn's quiet echo isn't just a story. It's the town's way of saying, we survived, we thrived, and we still have the best sunrise view in the realm. The moon hung low over Valora, casting a silver veil on the ancient cobblestones. Lanterns flickered like fireflies trapped in glass, their amber glow spilling onto the narrow alleys. Elias, the city's night watchman, paced his route with the solemnity of a monk on a caffeine-free retreat. He brushed his calloused fingers over the brass gears of his pocket watch, listening for the tick that never quite matched the city's heartbeat. A stray cat hissed, sending a puff of stale fish odor swirling around his boots. From the opposite end of the square emerged Leora, a minstrel whose lute was as battered as a thrift store guitar. She sang a half-forgotten ballad about a dragon who preferred sushi over nights, drawing a chuckle from Elias. Her scarf, patched with colors that would make a rainbow blush, fluttered like a banner in a medieval wind tunnel. The night air carried the sweet scent of spiced figs from a nearby vendor, mixing with the metallic tang of rain on stone. Leora's eyes sparkled, promising mischief and stories older than the Empire's Wi-Fi password. Together they strolled down Rue des Echoes, where each step seemed to summon a whisper from the past. The stones, slick with recent rain, sang a low, mournful hum that sounded suspiciously like a broken vinyl record. As they passed a cracked fountain, a ghostly ripple rose, forming silhouettes of merchants haggling over silk and sarcasm. Elias felt a chill on his neck, as if an invisible hand had brushed his hair and whispered, "Watch the gutters, they're full of more than just rain." Leora laughed, striking a chord that made the lanterns sway like they were doing a slow-motion disco. The murmurs coalesced into a tale of a baker who baked loaves that sang lullabies to the moon. According to the stone-born gossip, the baker's secret ingredient was moonlight harvested by a cat named Schrödinger, both alive and dead at the same time, a feline version of quantum physics. Elias snorted, picturing a cat in a tiny lab coat, while Leora added a verse about a knight who mistook a street lamp for a dragon and fled in terror. The story swirled around them, scented with fresh bread, burnt incense, and the faint whiff of old parchment. Even the rats paused their midnight snack to listen, their beady eyes reflecting the lantern glow like tiny disco balls. When the last note faded, the night settled back into its usual hush, but the streets felt lighter, as if someone had finally turned off a centuries-old alarm clock. Elias tipped his hat to Leora, thanking her for turning the city's static into a soundtrack worthy of a Netflix binge. She winked, promising to return with more songs that could make statues dance and bureaucrats blush. The lanterns, now steady, cast long shadows that whispered, "See you tomorrow, watchman," and Elias smiled, feeling the weight of his watch less like a burden and more like a metronome for adventure. With a final glance at the glittering cobbles, he vanished into the night, already hearing the next story rustle in the wind. The night draped the old clock tower in a shroud of cobwebbed silence, and Elias could hear the wind whistling through the cracked gears like a busted saxophone. Leora, flashlight trembling, nudged a loose stone that gave way with a sigh that sounded suspiciously like a tired sigh from a tired sitcom dad. Behind the stone lay a weather-worn parchment, its edges frayed like the cuffs of a medieval coat that had survived too many feasts. The map smelled of mildew, rust, and a faint hint of burnt incense, as if a monk had once used it to navigate his way out of a particularly smoky confession. Both of them stared at the inked lines, feeling the pulse of the city's forgotten heartbeat beneath their fingertips. The parchment was a cartographer's nightmare, ink smeared by rain, arrows wobbling like drunk sailors, and annotations scrawled in a hand that seemed to have been written during a thunderstorm. It pointed straight to the market square, where a series of sealed chambers lay hidden beneath stalls that still sold stale cheese and wilted herbs. Leora traced a route that zigzagged past a fountain that no longer sang, its water long turned to a grimy puddle that reflected the moon like a broken mirror. Elias chuckled, noting that the map's legend used a tiny drawing of a dragon that looked suspiciously like a misplaced emoji, as if the ancient scribe had a sense of humor. The promise of a fragment of the city's lost legend flickered in their minds like a neon sign in a ghost town. Armed with nothing but a rusted lantern, a bag of stale pretzels, and a stubborn curiosity, the duo slipped down the market's back alleys, the cobblestones clacking under their boots like a percussion section on a budget Broadway show. The air grew thick with the scent of burnt meat and spilled ale, a perfume that would make a modern food critic cringe. When they found the concealed hatch, it creaked open with a groan that could have been a disgruntled ghost complaining about rent. Leora slipped inside first, her boots splashing through a puddle of murky water that smelled like old socks left in a sauna. Elias followed, muttering a half-remembered line from Indiana Jones. "Fortune and glory, kid, just watch out for the booby traps," while trying not to step on a stray rat that squeaked like a squeaky toy. The first chamber was a low, vaulted room lit by flickering torches that sputtered as if they were trying to keep a secret from the darkness. Walls were plastered with faded frescoes depicting heroes juggling flaming swords, and a cat that looked suspiciously like Garfield in a medieval cape. In the center sat a stone pedestal, and atop it lay a cracked vellum scroll that crackled when Elias brushed his fingers over it, releasing a puff of dust that tasted like old library books mixed with regret. The scroll narrated a fragment of the city's legend, a phoenix that once rose from the market's ashes, only to be trapped in a cycle of rebirth every time a new mayor promised fresh ideas and delivered potholes. Leora laughed, noting that the city's politics were as cyclical as a Netflix binge-watch session, and the phoenix seemed more like a tired office worker stuck in a loop. As they tucked the scroll into their satchel, a low rumble echoed from deeper beneath, suggesting more chambers awaited, each guarding its own slice of mythic pie. Elias felt a shiver of excitement, while Leora's grin hinted at the kind of mischievous anticipation that only a night of treasure hunting can spark. They emerged from the tower with the sunrise painting the rooftops gold, the city's ancient whispers now a tangible weight in their pockets. The map, now slightly more creased, seemed to grin back at them, as if saying, "You've only scratched the surface, folks. There's a whole library of legends down there, and the overdue fees are steep." With a final chuckle, they promised each other to return, because what's a legend without a sequel, right? The moon hung like a tarnished coin over the cobblestones, as the watchmaker and the minstrel traced the trembling ink of the ancient map. Their boots splashed through puddles that reflected flickering lanterns, and the occasional stray cat with eyes like polished amber. Behind them, the night guild slipped through the shadows, their cloaks whispering like a secret society of moths. Each step echoed the city's old heartbeat, a thrum that seemed to warn them they were not alone. The duo pressed on, their breath forming ghostly ribbons in the cold air. A narrow alley yawned ahead, its walls plastered with graffiti that looked like medieval emojis, a skull, a rose, and a tiny stick figure holding a lute. The minstrel cracked a joke about the graffiti being the city's version of Twitter, earning a snort from the watchmaker. A brass plaque half-rusted posed a riddle, "What never sleeps but never dreams?" They muttered the answer, the city's clock tower, and the stone door creaked open with a sigh of stale incense. The scent of burnt cheese and damp stone assaulted their nostrils, a reminder that history smells like a forgotten market stall. Their lanterns flickered, casting jittery shadows that danced like nervous fireflies. From the darkness emerged the Night Guild, their faces masked with intricate ironwork that resembled the gears of a giant watch. The guildmaster, a gaunt woman with eyes that glittered like polished onyx, spoke in riddles about memory and time, as if she were a living Wikipedia page. She warned them that the city's stories are guarded like secret recipes. One wrong ingredient and the whole stew collapses. The watchmaker, ever the tinkerer, offered a pocket watch as tribute, only for the guild to laugh and say, "We prefer our time analog, darling, not digital." The tension dissolved into a brief, absurd dance of swords that clanged like kitchen utensils, leaving both sides panting and oddly amused. When the confrontation ended, the duo found a quiet courtyard where the moonlight pooled like spilled milk on the marble fountain. The minstrel strummed a soft ballad about forgotten heroes, his voice weaving through the night like a silk thread. The watchmaker, eyes softening, showed a tiny gear he had crafted from a broken bottle, explaining how every gear, no matter how small, keeps the whole machine humming. Their laughter rang out, mingling with the distant hoot of an owl that sounded suspiciously like a sarcastic commentator. In that moment, the bond between them tightened, forged by shared danger and the simple joy of swapping stories over a cracked stone bench. As they slipped back into the labyrinthine streets, the Night Guild faded into the mist, leaving behind a lingering scent of old parchment and a promise that the city's memories would not be so easily stolen. The watchmaker glanced at the map, now smudged with rain and the occasional stray droplet of ink, and declared it was time for a coffee break, preferably one that didn't involve accursed brew. The minstress rolled her eyes, quipping that the only thing more bitter than the city's secrets was the espresso at the next tavern. They vanished around a corner, their silhouettes merging with the night, ready for the next chapter of their nocturnal odyssey. The city, ever watchful, hummed beneath their feet, waiting to reveal its next hidden tale. The moon hung like a silver lantern over the ancient cathedral, spilling cold light into its stone-cobbled crypt. Damp air smelled of mildew and old incense, a perfume that made Elia's nose twitch like a cat in a fish market. Shadows danced on the vaulted walls, flickering as if the ghosts were doing a midnight flash mob. Leora's boots splashed in a puddle of forgotten wine, the sour tang of rot hitting her tongue. The silence was so thick you could hear the distant echo of a choir rehearsal from a century ago. Elias stepped forward, his cloak rustling like a pirate's flag, and called out the guild leader's name with a grin that said, "I'm about to drop truth bombs." The guild master emerged from behind a marble sarcophagus, his eyes glittering like a discount superhero cape. Leora raised her lantern, its flame sputtering as if it had just watched a horror movie, and was nervous. The clink of their swords against the stone sounded like a percussion section in a marching band that had lost its sheet music. A stray bat swooped past, scattering a cloud of dust that smelled like old cheese left in a cellar. "The true treasure," Elias shouted, "is not a chest of gold, but the stories we stitch together like a medieval Instagram feed." He gestured to the walls, where centuries of whispered legends were etched in faded frescoes that smelled faintly of burnt pine. The guild leader scoffed, his laugh echoing like a broken record stuck on the same note. Leora countered, pointing to a cracked tile that bore a tiny carving of a laughing child, proof that joy survived even the worst plagues. The irony hung in the air like a bad joke at a royal banquet. The richest hoard was invisible, yet everyone fought over it like they were chasing Wi-Fi in a stone castle. Suddenly, a suffocating hush crept in, as if the crypt itself were trying to swallow every word and turn them into dust. The guild leader whispered, "Silence is power," and the words felt as cold as a vampire's handshake. Elias felt the silence gnaw at his thoughts, like a toddler chewing on a shoe, uncomfortable but oddly persistent. Leora, with a wink, quoted the Jedi, "The greatest weapon is not a lightsaber, but a story well told," and the crypt seemed to shiver at the pop culture prophecy. The air grew thick with the scent of old parchment and spilled ale, reminding everyone that history is a messy cocktail, not a pristine museum display. With a dramatic flourish, Leora slammed her lantern down, sending a cascade of sparks that lit the crypt like a fireworks show at a medieval fair. The guild leader staggered back, his confidence crumbling like stale bread under a rainstorm. Elias knelt, brushed the dust from an ancient diary, and declared that the stories would be sung in taverns, whispered in markets, and streamed on the town's gossip grapevine. As the moon slipped behind a cloud, the crypt echoed with laughter, the sound of a people refusing to be silenced. And so, under the waning glow, they walked out, leaving the guild's greed behind like an expired coupon, useless, but oddly satisfying to toss away. When the guild's oath cracked like a cheap vinyl record, the ancient chambers shuddered awake, their stone doors yawning wide. Dust that had lain undisturbed since the Empire's last banquet erupted into swirling clouds, tickling the nostrils of anyone daring enough to linger. The walls, etched with forgotten lullabies, began to hum, as if a choir of ghostly bards had been stuck on repeat. From the deepest vaults, stories slipped out like mischievous cats, leaping over cobblestones and into the night. Even the pigeons, seasoned witnesses to centuries of gossip, squawked in surprise, as if they'd just seen a plot twist in a soap opera. As the first blush of sunrise stretched across the skyline, the rooftops caught fire with gold that made the city look like a freshly baked croissant. Warm amber seeped into narrow alleys, coaxing the stubborn shadows to retreat like shy teenagers at a school dance. Valora's bakers inhaled the sweet promise of fresh dough, while the fishmongers braced for the salty spray of the river that now sang a new refrain. The ancient stories, now loose in the air, brushed against shutters and windows, whispering of heroes who once stole the moon for a lover. A lone street sweeper, humming an off-key rendition of a pop anthem, paused to stare at the sky, wondering if the universe had finally updated its playlist. The silent streets, once as mute as a librarian's stare, erupted with verses that bounced off stone like ping-pong balls. Children chased the lyrical ribbons, their laughter ricocheting off tavern doors that still smelled of spilled ale and burnt incense. A stray dog, fur matted with yesterday's rain, trotted past a mural that now depicted a knight ordering a latte, a nod to the modern world's absurdity. The scent of jasmine from a hidden garden mingled with the metallic tang of old swords, creating a perfume that was both romantic and oddly antiseptic. Even the city's infamous catacombs seemed to sigh in relief, their damp corridors finally hearing a story that didn't involve endless echoing footfalls. Irony dripped from the scene like melted chocolate on a sundae, because the very oath meant to protect the past had become its greatest spoiler. The mayor, who usually strutted like a peacock in ceremonial robes, now shuffled in slippers, muttering about unexpected plot developments like a director caught mid-shoot. A street vendor, selling roasted chestnuts, began quoting Shakespeare while tossing kernels, proving that even centuries-old drama can be seasoned with salt. Passers-by snapped selfies with the animated statues, their phones buzzing louder than a medieval battle drum, turning history into a viral TikTok challenge. Yet amid the chaos, an old poet whispered to a lamppost that the city's heart still beat in meter, a reminder that rhythm survives even when the script is rewritten. By noon, Valora stood reborn, its heritage stitched together with fresh threads of myth and meme alike. The sunrise had not only painted rooftops, but also illuminated the truth that stories are living, breathing creatures that love a good surprise. Citizens walked with shoulders back, feeling the weight of centuries lift like a feather from a dragon's back. The silent streets, now humming with new verses, promised that every corner would echo with a tale waiting to be told, whether heroic or hilariously mundane. And as the city exhaled, the ancient chambers settled back into quiet, content that their secrets had finally found a stage worthy of a standing ovation.